Okay, the reading for this week is the next part in our series on Japanese civilization, philosophy, and culture. And today we will be reading excerpts from The Great Learning for Women, or Onna Daigaku, by Kaibara Ekken. And I've actually already done a recitation of this entire work and posted it onto YouTube. So you might want to listen to the whole work with the link to the text in that previous video, and I'll put the link to that video below in the description. Here we have just an important excerpt from that work, and I will be reading it here along with the study questions. And once again, this is taken from Sources of Japanese Tradition, edited by Theodore DeBerry, Carol Gluck, and Arthur Tiedemann, Volume 2 this time. Okay, so I'll put the link to that book, Sources of Japanese Tradition, Volume 2, below in the description as well, and you can purchase the book and follow along. And here is the excerpts from the Onna Daigaku by Kaibara Ekken, starting with the introduction. Let me read the introduction first. So, Kaibara Ekken, born 1630, 1740, so the first half of the Edo period is when he lived. If you haven't memorized the dates for the major periods in Japanese history, do so now. It's much easier to remember these dates than those of Chinese dynasty history, because Japanese history is much shorter. It's only about half the length of Chinese history if you date it all the way back to 1500 BC or whenever. So Kaibara Ekken, born 1630, died 1740, was a Neo-Confucian scholar. Underline Neo-Confucian. You will remember from the lectures on Chinese civilization and culture that Neo-Confucianism, or Dao Shui, was really founded, well, not necessarily founded, but brought into, crystallized, you might say, by Zhu Xi in the early Song period. And Zhu Xi is, of course, the one who brought together the 4 books and made those the canonical text of this new form of Confucianism that kind of fused earlier original Confucianism with later movements, the later ideologies or philosophies of Taoism and Buddhism. So kind of brought together these 3 streams into Neo-Confucianism, and that came to Japan in the just before the Edo period, really, and became the sort of official ideology during the Edo period in Japan. So Kaibara Ekken is one of the major Neo-Confucian scholars of the Edo period. He was also a naturalist. He served the Kuroda lords of Fukuoka domain on the southern island of Kyushu. He was committed to popularizing Confucian ethics and was well known for his accessible self-help guides, and this is one of them. This is a self-help guide for women specifically. Down-to-earth manuals of behavior written in vernacular Japanese rather than in different scholarly language. Ekken's treatises included volumes delineating proper conduct for lords, warriors, children, families, and perhaps most famously, women. In Onna Daigaku, The Great Learning for Women, Ekken promotes a strict code of behavior for mothers, wives, and daughters, very much in harmony with the Neo-Confucian intellectual orthodoxy of Tokugawa Japan. Okay, and you remember that Zhu Xi, the Neo-Confucian philosopher of the Song dynasty in China, took the Dashui, the Daigaku, the Great Learning, out of the Li Ji, the Book of Rites. It was one of the chapters in the Book of Rites, and he made it an independent work, called it the Dashui, and included it among the Si Shu, the 4 books that became the canonical texts of Neo-Confucianism. Okay, so Kaibara Ekken borrows that title, the Dashui, the Daigaku, and sort of rewrites a version of it that is specifically directed at women. Okay, so very much in harmony. Okay, so I will read the excerpt from that essay. If you want to read the essay in full, again, click on the link that I will provide in the description below with my full recitation of the full work. Okay, excerpts from Onna Daigaku by Kaibara Ekken. And before I read the essay, let me first go to the study questions. There are 4 study questions. We'll discuss these in class. Think about them, consider them as we read this excerpt. Question number 1. What values does the author of this piece feel are most important for women to cultivate? Okay, so what values, what virtues are most important in Kaibara Ekken's view? Question number 2. Do you think Ekken advocated education for women? Why or why not? Obviously he did. It's kind of a silly question, but yes. What sort of education did he advocate for women, and up to what age? And how is that education that he's advocating for women different from that of men? The education he advocated for men. And question number 3. What does Ekken mean by silliness in this passage? Okay, so when we get to the word silliness, underline it, and we'll consider what he means by silliness. And question number 4, do you think most women in Tokugawa Japan followed codes of conduct like those outlined here? Or is he advocating this sort of codes of conduct precisely because women in the period do not follow them? Okay, so we'll consider that as well in class. Okay, here's the essay. It's only about 2.5 pages, so I'll read the excerpt here in full. It is let me pause it here for a second. Excerpts from the Onna Daigaku, The Great Learning for Women by Kaibara Ekken. It is the duty of a girl living in her parents' house to practice filial piety. Okay, so xiao in Chinese, we saw this filial piety, which is absolutely central. It's sort of the cardinal virtue in early Confucianism, and it's very important in Japanese Neo-Confucianism of the Edo period. Oyakoko is the word in Japanese. So it is the duty of a girl living in her parents' house to practice oyakoko, filial piety, toward her father and mother. But after marriage, her duty is to honor her father-in-law and mother-in-law, to honor them beyond her father and mother, to love and reverence them with all ardor, and to tend them with a practice of filial piety. Okay, so he's basing his comments here on the idea of the Sang-tsong, or Sanju, the woman's 3 obediences: to father first when she is born, when she's a child, then to the husband, and then to the son. But he's throwing in the father-in-law and the mother-in-law as an addition here. While thou honorest thine own parents, think not lightly of thy father-in-law. Never should a woman fail, night and morning, to pay her respects to her father-in-law and mother-in-law. Never should she be remiss in performing any tasks they may require of her. With all reverence she must carry out and never rebel against her father-in-law's commands. On every point she must inquire of her father-in-law and mother-in-law and accommodate herself to their direction. Even if thy father-in-law and mother-in-law are disposed to hate and vilify thee, do not be angry with them, and murmur not. Okay, this translation is sort of an outdated one. I think it's the only one that exists, so they had to use it here, but it's written in sort of late 19th century British English. Even if thy father-in-law and mother-in-law are disposed to hate and vilify thee, do not be angry with them, and murmur not. If thou carry piety toward them to its utmost limits and minister to them in all sincerity, it cannot be but that they will end by becoming friendly to thee. A woman has no other lord. She must look to her husband as her lord, and must serve him with all worship and reverence, not despising or thinking lightly of him. The way of the woman, Onna no michi, is to obey her man. Onna no dao is to obey her man. In her dealings with her husband, both the expression of her countenance and the style of her address should be courteous, humble, and conciliatory, never peevish and intractable, never rude and arrogant. That should be a woman's first and principal care. When the husband issues his instructions, the wife must never disobey them. In doubtful cases she should inquire of her husband and obediently follow his commands. If her husband ever asks her a question, she should answer to the point. To answer carelessly would be a mark of rudeness. If her husband becomes angry at any time, she must obey him with fear and trembling, and not oppose him in anger and forwardness. A woman should look on her husband as if he were heaven. Remember Tian, the idea of Tian in Chinese Confucianism is what he's referring to here. A woman should look on her husband as if he were heaven, Tian, Ten in Japanese, heaven itself, and never weary of thinking how she may yield to him and thus escape celestial castigation. A woman must always be on the alert and keep strict watch over her conduct. Okay, so this is about propriety. Remember the idea of li in Chinese Confucianism, propriety. This is about detailed advice about how to conduct herself with propriety. Keep strict watch over her own conduct. In the morning she must rise early, and at night go late to rest. Instead of sleeping in the middle of the day, she must be intent on the duties of her household. She must never grow tired of weaving, sewing, and spinning. She must not drink too much tea and wine, nor must she feed her eyes and ears on theatrical performances such as kabuki, jewelry, puppet theater, ditties, and ballads. In her capacity as wife, she must keep her husband's household in proper order. If the wife is evil and profligate, the house will be ruined. In everything she must avoid extravagance, and in regard to both food and clothes, she must act according to her station in life and never give it in to luxury and pride. Final paragraph. The 5 worst infirmities that afflict women are indocility, discontent, slander, jealousy, and silliness. Okay, underline silliness here. There was a question about this. What does he mean by silliness here? Without any doubt, these 5 infirmities are found in 7 or 8 of every 10 women, and it is they that cause women to be inferior to men. A woman should counteract them with self-inspection and self-reproach. The worst of them all, and the parent of the other 4, is silliness. Okay, this is the worst of all 4 of them. The worst of all 5 of them, and the parent of the other 4 is silliness. A woman's nature is passive, yin, right? The yin yo, the yin of yin and yang. A woman's nature is yin, or passive, dark. The yin nature comes from the darkness of night. Hence, as viewed from the standard of a man's nature, or yang, the yang of yin and yang, as viewed from the standard of a man's nature, a woman's foolishness means that she fails to understand the duties that lie before her very eyes, does not recognize the actions that will bring blame on her own head, and does not comprehend even those things that will bring calamity to her husband and children. Now when she blames and accuses and curses innocent persons, or when in her jealousy of others she thinks only of herself, does she see that she is her own enemy, alienating others and incurring their hatred. Lamentable errors. Again, in the education of her children, her blind affection induces an erroneous system. Such is the stupidity of her character that it is incumbent on her in every detail to distrust herself and obey her husband. Okay, so that's the end of this passage from Onna Daigaku. And this is a translation adapted and revised from Chamberlain. Okay, so it's a very early translation included in education literature of Japanese women. It doesn't have the date here, but it's the early 20th century, I think, when Chamberlain wrote this translation. All right, we'll discuss more in detail in class and compare it with the original Japanese as well, which is surprisingly close to modern Japanese, so we should be able to read through it. All right, that is all for now. I will see you in class. Goodbye.